Hey, what's up, guys? In today's video, we have Leo. I did a couple videos on the channel with him before playing Codenames, but today I wanted to bring him onto the channel to talk about his experience with Spanish and just his experience in general with language learning. So, Leo, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. I'm Leo. I'm currently living in Boston. Before that, I was in St. Louis, though. But here I work as a teacher. So I'm a music teacher. I work in the public school system. And I've also been learning Spanish for 3 years at this point. And it's a huge hobby of mine. I spend every day learning, doing something with Spanish. Not necessarily for any specific goal other than just like the enjoyment. So I have a YouTube channel too where I sort of document that process. And that's how I met Joe because our channels are a little bit similar. Um, but yeah, that's me.
Cool, cool. So you didn't have any specific goal in mind with Spanish. It's just like the pure effect of learning, right?
Yeah, I think maybe at the beginning, like I don't know, I had a couple goals. Like for example, at the time I was in grad school, so I would do like observations. We'd go into schools and practice teaching and stuff, and I just obviously noticed that there are a lot of like Spanish speakers in schools, people that are learning languages. So I had a couple like early, I had a couple experiences early on where I could actually use the Spanish I was learning to like help teach those students.
Mhm.
And that was really gratifying. So maybe at the beginning it was a little bit like, oh, I could use this a lot for my work, but the more you do it, it becomes sort of like a passion. You fall in love with the language, and for me, the actual process of studying is very enjoyable. Like I enjoy learning about grammar. I enjoy practicing my Spanish in that way. So it's just never been difficult for me in that sense. So it's just
Yeah,
kind of,
they always say to find your passion, but a lot of times your passion ends up coming about in things that you just like work on and like start picking at. Like probably in the beginning, your Spanish passion wasn't as much, and then now like when you've gotten a lot better, now you're like, okay, cool, I really want to see how far I can push this, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. At this point, like I've been really into reading lately. And so
Mhm.
that's been kind of my new, like, sort of passion, which is cool because I never read much in English, and I'm reading way more now in Spanish than I ever read in English. So I'm almost like discovering this new passion of reading, but through Spanish, which is cool.
Yeah, I saw your video on your goals, your Spanish 2025
Hmm.
goals, which I think we'll get to in a little bit, like a couple questions later. But also one of my goals as well is reading more because I also
Yep.
don't read much in English. I guess if you count like, I don't know, Reddit and like
Sure.
online things, I guess that's also like reading. But yeah, you did mention also that it did help a lot when you were in grad school. Do you feel like it's helped a lot in other like, I don't know, facets and stuff like that? Like learning Spanish and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say it's helped more on like a personal level. It's definitely changed like who I am as a person, which is cool and for the better.
Mhm.
It's made me much more like understanding of different perspectives, like in the world basically. I don't know, for like before, I feel like I would sort of group all the Spanish speaking countries together in a way, like,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, they
yeah,
all
yeah.
speak Spanish, they're Hispanic.
Mhm.
But as you learn Spanish, obviously you're going to learn more about the countries, the nuances between the cultures, the differences between the cultures and stuff. And yeah, it just makes you see the world in a totally different way. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
you're very interested too. And anytime I meet someone from a Spanish speaking country, I'm super interested in
mhm.
them, and I want to like know all about them and their country and their culture. So it broadens your horizons.
Yeah. As like foreigners or like people who are like outside of the actual language or the culture, we have always have like an outside look on the language. We never have like the inside of like what's actually going on in the language. We always just see like what's either on the news or what's either on like, I don't know. It's like on the outside, like stereotypical stuff. And once you
Yeah.
actually learn the language, you know like exactly how things are in like the language itself.
Yeah, and you get to meet people that you never would have met otherwise. People who don't speak English, they only speak Spanish. It's like
That's the
those aren't
best part. Yeah.
you would have never been able to have a conversation with that person before. It's really amazing. It makes me want to learn more languages too. So it's
Have you thought about other languages?
I have a bit, but I kind of sometimes I just put arbitrary numbers to stuff. So my arbitrary number for this is I said after 5 years of Spanish, I'm going to start learning another language. So
Mhm.
I think I want to give it those extra couple years till I feel like super confident in my Spanish. I don't feel like I'm gonna like mess it up learning another language because right now I feel that way a little bit, especially if
Mhm.
I start learning like Portuguese or something, which I thought about. I feel like that would mess up my Spanish a bit.
Yeah,
Um,
especially just like rounding it out at the very end. I think that's the most important part.
yeah. So yeah, I've thought about Portuguese. I've thought about Chinese. just because
Mhm.
it's another language that is very useful, and so there'd be a lot of opportunity to actually use it like in real life, and obviously that's going to give you a lot more motivation if it's a language that's useful. And then
Mhm.
I also just really like ALS, American
Okay.
Sign Language. I've always loved like movement and just movement in general, and so I think it's cool that you can have a language that's totally gesture movement based. So I'm interested in learning more about it.
I for AALS,
Yeah,
this one. I've
ASL.
seen
Oh,
people.
ASL. I think I said it
I
wrong.
think it's
ASL.
ASL. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. American Sign Language.
Uh-huh.
Like I've seen like babies learn sign language just through like input as well. So
Yeah.
it was really crazy. I saw like some videos like where babies were like signaling back in like sign language and
hmm
stuff.
No,
It's
it's
pretty sick.
incredible, and they'll teach it to animals too. Like that's how they will teach language to gorillas and stuff is with sign language. So it's
Hmm.
accessible.
And so you have like 3 years, right? You were saying like you started 3 years ago.
Yeah, a
Like what
bit
did you do?
longer than that. I started in October of
Hmm.
2021, so it would be at this point about 3.5 years.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what do you think? Like, how did you start out? And then kind of how did the journey go? Like, tell us a little bit about like how you
Yeah,
started out, then the second year, then the third year.
sure. So I started out with Duolingo, and for the first
Hmm.
while, I only used Duolingo. And I was using it every day, like religiously. And I used it for a long time too, because even when I started adding in other things like language classes and Anki, which are the flashcards that I use, um, even when I added in other stuff, I continued Duolingo because I had this like goal. Again, my goals have always been like very strong. Like I'm just a kind of person where once I set a goal, I really like want to meet it, you know? And so my goal was to finish like the Spanish tree in Duolingo, and I ended up doing that after 2 years. But then I remember like the day I finished it, I just deleted the app. I'm like, okay, I'm done. So, because at that point I was very sick of it too, because the Spanish tree on Duolingo is like long. Like it to get through the whole thing takes a long time. But yeah, that's how I started. That's how I first got into it. Um, and I was just learning basic stuff, but the next tool that I kind of added after that was Anki, because at that point I was watching like YouTubers and I heard it mentioned again and again, like, oh, this is the best flashcard app and it's the best way to boost your vocabulary. And the thing that I really like about it is that you're constantly like reviewing old vocabulary, and it's got like the built-in algorithm to do that. And so what I like about it is that even if I take like a super long break from Spanish, I never feel like I'm actually like losing vocabulary. I never feel like my vocabulary is like atrophying, because I'm constantly reviewing those old words. So it's like, oh, I haven't practiced Spanish in like a week, but I'm still doing 5 minutes of flashcards a day, and I haven't like lost anything. Um, so I like that aspect a lot. A lot of people don't use flashcards, or they're kind of against using flashcards, but for me, it's been a really important part of my like how I've learned Spanish. Um, I also started conversation classes pretty early on. I remember if I started in October, I probably had my first conversation class in like December. So after two
Okay.
to 3 months of learning Spanish, super basic. I remember the first teacher that I had would basically show me a picture and I would just have to like describe the picture. So I would be like, El niño tiene una camisa verde.
Mhm.
Like you're saying, like really, you're just doing description of things. But
Mhm.
that's super difficult in the beginning because you're like trying to remember how to conjugate things and like gender and all that. So it's possible that I started a little bit too early with conversation. I think like, you know, if I were to learn another language in the future, I'd probably wait a little bit longer to do that. But in the case of Spanish, I did start that, pretty close to the beginning. And then since then, those have been basically the main things I've done is the flashcards and the conversation classes. And then more recently, I've added in the reading.
Mhm.
I've always done a lot of listening too with podcasts.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so like you did that that was like your main like thing you did in year one. Then
Yep.
year two and year three, you just kind of added on to that, or just things got harder and harder, or how did you see the progress? Like, did you see that you progressed linearly, or was it like in like a short span you feel like something that you got a lot better?
Yeah, I did. I was able to see and feel the progress, which made a big difference. Like, especially in the beginning, you'll like learn. I have a couple like strong memories of learning a specific concept and then just instantly being able to like apply that concept, and it's a really cool feeling. Like I remember when I learned that como is not just like a question, like to say
Mhm.
how, but it's also like in English, es como esto, like it's
Mhm.
like this,
Or
And I
each.
learned the same thing with que. That que is
Yeah.
not just like a question, like what, but it can mean like that, it's like a connecting word.
Mhm.
And I remember after I had that realization, like after I learned that, I was able to make sentences that were way more complex and like instantly. So
Mhm.
you have some breakthroughs like that when you're a beginner, which is really cool. And then obviously that's why they talk about the intermediate plateau, which is essentially just when those breakthroughs become way less consistent and common. And so it can be a little bit hard because those things really motivate you, when you have those breakthroughs and you really see that progress happening. Um,
Yeah, always those like junction words or like those like that or this or like I don't know, in English we have a bunch of these like I'm into that, which means that you
yeah,
like I'm into it, like or it's not physically into it, but like you're like kind of you like doing it or something like that. It's kind of
yes.
these weird like function words that only like natives would know or
hmm
like once you break through as you say said,
hmm
then you start to realize oh okay I can say this and that and a bunch of other
Yeah.
stuff.
No, it's true. It's true. And sometimes those breakthroughs do happen just like in an instant, and
Mhm.
your Spanish is just better like that. But it is definitely harder now,
Mhm.
as you get more advanced. Um,
And so you said you started speaking like quite early, and so you've been speaking this whole time, or like you've continued to practice speaking as you like every week, or do you have like a certain schedule or something like
yeah, I mean, Italki has been big for me.
that?
I use it a lot, honestly, and that's what the platform that I started on, and I've never tried any other platform because I've always been super happy with Italki. And at this point, I've done over 400 lessons probably in the 3.5 years I've been doing Spanish. So about 2 to 3 lessons a week, pretty consistently, with many different teachers. Um, but yeah, for me, it's just the most fun way to learn a language. Like just having a conversation is very, very enjoyable for me.
And how do you feel like how do you feel about your Spanish currently? Like, do you? I know you said that you had plans of doing more reading and stuff like that, and just
hmm
kind of rounding it out to like I don't know, your up
Yeah.
until your fifth year. But how do you feel? Like, do you think that you need something to speed it up a little bit, or I don't know? Do you feel like the rate that you're going is a good rate right now?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it. I mean, I would I would consider myself fluent in the
Mhm.
sense that I can talk about anything and I'm comfortable talking about anything. Um, but there's still a lot of room for growth. I find myself still translating in my head occasionally. Like for example, that example that you just gave about like getting into something.
Mhm.
That's something where I could find a way to say it in Spanish, but it might not be the most natural. Like I'd
Yeah.
probably say me interesé en esto, like I got interested in this thing,
Mhm.
or like me metí en esto.
Mhm.
But the thing is, I'm always thinking first in English. Like there's something I want to say in English, and then I have to think about it. How would I translate that, and then
Mhm.
say it in Spanish? So that's sort of people talk about translating in your head. I'm not usually translating in my head. I can usually just say my thoughts in Spanish, but occasionally with something like that, I am going to think first in English. So that's kind of a sign that I'm not as fluent as I would like to be, and that there's still some more work to be done. Um, I think just like listening more is going to help with that too, like more input, more reading, kind of just doing everything that I'm already doing, but just give it
More.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find the same thing. Like sometimes, I don't know, the idea that you want to express, like it just pops up immediately in English,
Yeah.
like you said, getting into something. But
Yeah.
then you're like, okay, in Spanish, like they wouldn't say that, or like that makes no sense in Spanish. So you like get
Yeah.
stuck for like, I don't know, a couple of seconds. You're like, okay, how should I say this or something?
Yeah. And you feel like it feels taxing on your brain almost, if that makes sense. Like you
Yeah.
feel like I can speak English way easier than I could speak Spanish. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I could speak English all day and be fine, but if I speak Spanish for a couple hours, I'm
Hmm.
like spent. Like it feels like I just did like a Sudoku puzzle or something. Like
Yeah.
it's a brain exercise. I can do it, and you know, I can do it, but
Mhm.
it's tough.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way.
Yeah.
A couple of other things I wanted to ask is about your plans on traveling. Do you have plans on traveling anywhere? Have you traveled anywhere, like in this time period, like 3 years, to a Spanish-speaking country or like anything like that?
Yeah, in this time I've done 2 trips. I did a 2-week trip to Mexico City. That was the first place I went. That was after about a year and a half learning Spanish, and it was awesome, honestly. It was an amazing trip.
Mm.
Um, I should do a video on that because I haven't talked about it a ton on my channel, but it was a really great trip. I did a bunch of research before I went, so I knew like exactly what I wanted to do. I went solo, so I was kind of able to do anything I wanted to do, and I made friends while I was there. I did a homestay. There's this website, homestay.com. You've probably heard of it, right?
Mhm.
So I stayed with like a native family, like had dinners with them, like met
That's
their
awesome. Yeah.
grandkids and everything, and it was like exactly what the experience I was looking for. And then I went to Spain. I did that trip with my girlfriend, who knows a little bit of Spanish, but she's not totally fluent. So it was a different vibe. It was more of like a cultural experience. We got to experience a lot of the culture, but it wasn't as much practicing my Spanish. Although something really cool is that one of my italki teachers that I had been seeing for 2 years, he's actually from Peru, but he had recently moved to Madrid, where we were. So we got to link up with him, and that was really awesome because he gave us a tour of the entire city, basically, and it was like a 10-hour, like we hung out with him the entire day, and he took us all around the city, and we took buses in the metro, and he showed us all the touristy stuff. So it's funny because we did that with him on like the second day we were there, and then we were like, "What do we do now?" Like we
Yeah,
saw
did
everything.
everything.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so that was really cool, and we, I got to practice my Spanish with him a lot and meet him, and um, yeah, those are the only 2 trips I've done though. Obviously, I have a lot of other plans too, a lot of other things I want to do. I think it would be cool to see more of my italki teachers, meet them in person. I have another teacher I've been seeing for a long time that lives in Colombia,
Mhm.
so I'd love to go visit him there. But yeah, I don't know. Central America is a lot more accessible from the U.S., so I'm also
Yeah.
thinking like Costa Rica. I know you recently went to Costa Rica, so I'm thinking there. I would go back to Mexico. I mean, there's so many places in Mexico alone that I would love
Yeah,
to
it's just
see.
like you could spend the entire year there and still like not have
Yeah,
gone everywhere.
exactly. And like I mentioned, I'm a teacher, so summer's off. So I think about doing like long summer trips and stuff. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it would be it would be cool to see like some of that stuff on your channel. You said like, I mean, you have like memories and everything, so you can talk about your experience.
Yeah.
Um, and another question is that did you spend any time? Well, you said like you spent time on Duolingo and stuff, but did
hmm
you spend a lot of time on grammar, or did you like buy grammar books and stuff like that to learn?
I did, yeah. I did, yeah. I worked through an entire grammar book. It's do you know the Practice Makes Perfect series?
No.
It's like a red book. They have all types of like Spanish books, but they have this
Okay.
one that's like complete Spanish grammar. And
Mhm.
I remember I worked my way through that one over like a winter break, like like I think like the second year learning Spanish. We had like a winter break when I was in grad school, like a month off, and I just worked on it like every day, and I was able to finish that grammar book, and I learned a lot of new things from it. And now I'm working my way through another grammar book. That's called oof. I don't remember what it's called, but I'll send it to you after. Oh, what is it? It's like it might just be Gramática del Español, like a really simple name like that.
Mhm.
But I like it because it's all in Spanish. So each page is like a different chapter, and it's all in Spanish. It gives you an explanation of a grammatical concept and then exercises. So I'm
Mhm.
working my way through that. But I enjoy doing those grammar textbooks, grammar exercises. I feel like I do always learn something new, honestly. There's stuff that like you encounter when you're reading or like in a conversation that kind of just like goes over your head, like because you understand what they're trying to say, but you don't necessarily incorporate that new grammar until you actually like read about it and do the exercises. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, trying to think of an example of that. I don't know. I don't know. This is something really small, but like as an example, um, with the phrase like igual de, like somos igual de altos, which
Mhm.
would be like we're just as tall as each other,
Yeah.
or son igual de agradables, like they're equally nice, kind,
Mhm.
pleasant. Um, that was like something I learned recently from the grammar book, where it's like if I'm reading a book and I come across that, I'm gonna understand it without any issue. But
Mhm.
it's not something that I'm gonna actually incorporate into my vocabulary just by reading it or hearing it. But by doing the exercises in the textbook, I am incorporating it in my vocabulary, and I'll actually use it in a conversation, which
Mhm.
is cool. So I see a lot of value in that, even at the advanced level.
Do you still continue doing it, or do you have other
I
books
do,
maybe?
yeah. I do.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to work my way through the book, and then this is like the B2 one, and when I finish this one, I'll probably buy myself the C1.
cool, cool.
Yeah.
And then for like content that you consume, do you have like favorite things? Like maybe do you have series or like do you like podcasts more or do you like YouTube? Like what kind of stuff do you consume?
More than anything else, podcasts for sure. I've always had a long commute. Like, um, yeah, my job has always been far away. School's always been far. Summer jobs. I've always been
Mm,
commuting every day, and so I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'll listen to music too. But whenever I don't feel like that, it's always a podcast. So they've changed a lot over time. Like I used to listen to a lot of like Spanish language learning podcasts,
mm,
which are still honestly useful, and I'll listen to them sometimes. But more and more, I'm trying to listen to more like podcasts for native speakers. So there's a couple that I really like. Any of the NPR ones are really
mm,
good. So the NPR ones are like Radio Ambulante is really good, and then El Hilo, which is
mm.
made by like the same people. And they basically just go around Latin America and they do like really high quality journalism. And so they just tell interesting stories. And you know, it's a Spanish that's neutral and super easy to understand. So I love those podcasts. And then there's a couple more ones of like history podcasts that I enjoy. It's funny because I was never like into history until I started learning Spanish. But as you learn Spanish, you kind of get into it because there's just so much
Yeah,
history around the language.
yeah, you like
Um,
sign up for it.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, podcasts always been big. I've watched very few series in Spanish. Like I could
Mm,
probably count them on one hand how many. And that's just because I've never been like a TV person. I
mm.
don't really enjoy watching TV as much as I enjoy watching like YouTube videos. So there's a ton of YouTubers I watch to mention that, but not many series. Um,
Have
yeah,
you noticed like as you in the beginning you used to listen to more like beginner friendly, as you said, like stuff for learners, and then now do you start listening to things that are more like, oh, okay, I would listen to this in English, or like I don't know more about let's say business, or maybe you can learn about technology, but you just opt for the Spanish version of things.
definitely. It's like I killed two birds with one stone
Yeah,
type of
yeah,
thing, Like if I'm gonna do this in English, I might as well do it in Spanish and get some practice in.
yeah, yeah. I feel the same way. Like I started doing that where like I like I'm naturally into technology and I just like tech, so I just like opt for the Spanish version of things. And it's
Yeah,
really interesting to see like there's a lot of words that are like the same, where they just like either translate it over, or it's like the same word or something like that, but it's just like said with a Spanish accent. So
exactly.
it's
That's
funny.
always funny. That's always funny. Um, but kind of on the other side of the coin, I do sort of the opposite thing where I'll also listen to stuff in Spanish that I would like never listen to in English.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
Like for example, when I'm reading, I've started reading a lot of like young adult novels in Spanish because they're actually like a great place to start because, or not to start, sorry, a great like intermediate sort of
Hmm.
advanced place because it's not like reading an actual novel is very, very difficult. Like you're gonna run into so many words you don't know. And then obviously you have like graded readers, like some of the stuff that we've talked about before, like the Ollie Richards, which are great, don't get me wrong, but they're not written for native speakers. Young adult novels are nice because they are written for native speakers, but they're like an easier Spanish.
Hmm.
And so I've been enjoying reading that, but that's not I would never read that in English.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think even in English, I never read those young adult books because like I wasn't into reading at all in the beginning.
Yeah,
So I feel like now I'm just like finally getting that like that experience that I should have had in English. I'm getting that in English or in Spanish now.
exactly.
So it's pretty cool.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I'm reading this book now called La Última Cuentista.
Hmm.
It's like a science fiction young adult thing, and it's enjoyable. It's because you're understanding the plot really well. Like
Hmm.
I finished recently Cien Años de Soledad,
Okay,
and it's
cool,
like
cool.
I'm reading it and I can appreciate it for what it is, but it's just so difficult. Like
Really?
oh yeah, it's tough. Mostly because of the vocabulary. It is written more like not poetry, but with that literary sort of language that's like
Hmm.
not the way you would talk in real life. So it's tough.
Hmm.
It's like taking your vitamins.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the series and I know it's like a little bit more fairy tale, or there's like a lot of
Uh-huh.
more like stuff like that, like magical things that can happen. So it might be a bit
Yes.
confusing,
Well, the
especially when
hardest
learning.
part, did you watch the whole series?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know how this is portrayed in the series, but the hardest part of the book is that it seems like everyone has the same name or the
Oh,
same like
really?
two names. Yeah, because I mean, that's a Latino thing too, where they're
Mhm.
passing down names and stuff. But in the books, that's really hard because it takes place over 100 years,
Mhm.
and so you have generations and generations all with like the same name, and the family tree is very confusing.
Yeah, I think I noticed that in the series, there was like always like the junior or like the senior of this person, so it's like always
Yeah,
it's really confusing to know who they're referring
yeah,
to, especially if they're like it's not very obvious or like, it's not on the screen.
yeah. But it was good to read it. It definitely improved my Spanish, just the input.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know how comprehensible it was in terms of input.
Yeah,
But
but you can say
it'll
you
be
read it.
nice. Yeah, I read it, and it'll be nice to come back to it in 2-3 years or something, and
Mhm.
see where I've improved. But
And kind of dovetailing, do you have a specific accent or a specific type of Spanish that you're trying to focus on, or do you just kind of listen to whatever and just kind of consume whatever, so let
yeah,
whatever happens happen?
um, I'm I I'm not trying to consume a specific type of Spanish. But I think if I had to align my Spanish to one, it would probably be Mexican.
Mhm.
Just because that's what some people have told me before, like that it sounds as if I'm speaking with like a Mexican
Mhm.
influence. Um, it could just be because those are a lot of the podcasts I listened to in the beginning.
Yeah.
One of my favorite intermediate podcasts is the How to Spanish podcast. Is really good for intermediate learners. Also, the Mex Talkie is super funny. I
Yeah.
think we mentioned that one before
Next
in our
Talkie is
last
awesome.
video. Yeah, they're hilarious and also good intermediate because they're teaching you along the way about the grammar and the
Mhm.
colloquialisms. So definitely in terms of like slang, I'm most familiar and comfortable with that slang. A lot of the YouTubers I like too, like I don't know if you ever watch Luisito Comunica,
Yep.
but he's great. I love his videos. So in terms of like input, I've probably like audio, I've probably heard most of that, but I'm honestly not trying to emulate any specific accent. The other Spanish I listen to a lot of is Buenos Aires, like the Argentinian, specifically from Rio de la Plata.
Mhm.
Because again, there's just a lot of content. Like for example, those two podcasts I mentioned to you, the El Hilo and Radio Ambulante,
Mhm.
they're both produced by like I don't know if the studio is like Argentinian or in Argentina, but the host is. And so you'll hear that accent a lot. Also, the TED in Espanol, like the TED Talks in Spanish,
Mhm.
are the host is Argentinian. And then also I take my roommate's Argentinian, who
Yeah.
I speak to occasionally in Spanish, but not as much as you would think.
Okay.
And then I take a yoga class once a week that's in Spanish, and my teacher's Argentinian, so I have a lot of exposure to that as well.
Cool. Cool. So you have like
Yeah,
a bit of Mexican and then a bit of Argentinian Spanish.
yeah, which is an interesting mix, but I don't know in terms of how I talk, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But I go through like different phases where I'll get really interested in a certain type of Spanish and learn about the slang and whatever, and then
Mhm.
move on to a different one.
And
Yeah.
do you feel like I saw like in your Spanish goals video, you said like you wanted to take like the C1 exam. Do you feel like how do you feel about the exams? Like, do you feel like they're a good measuring point or measuring stick of like your progress, or do you plan on taking like C2 exam? I don't even know if there's a C2 exam as well.
Yeah, there is the C2, the Delhi exam, they're called
Mhm.
Diploma of Español como lenguaje extranjera or something like that.
Mhm.
Lengua extranjera. Um, yeah, I mean, I took the B2 and I did really well on certain parts of it, the speaking, the reading. I did okay on the listening, but I could improve. And then the writing, I didn't do great on. That part was difficult.
Mhm.
So I want to take the C1 and I'm feeling pretty good about it, but I need to practice the writing for sure. But just in terms of like, what do I think about taking the exam? For me, it's like a big motivating factor. Um, Not for any specific reason. Like you do need the exam if you want to like work in a Spanish speaking country, or I don't know about any Spanish speaking country, but specifically in like Spain, you would need to pass the exam.
Mhm.
I think at least C1 to be able to work there, perhaps
Well,
B2. I'm not sure.
mhm.
Um, but for me, it's not really because of that. It's more just like it gives you a goal. It's like, okay, if I'm gonna take this in November, this is what I need to do. This, and this, and you can kind of set yourself up. And just in studying for that B2 exam, I like learned a lot and improved my Spanish a lot. Because I did practice more like writing, more formal speech. a lot of like reading where you would read a
Mhm.
passage, then you'd have to answer like comprehension questions. Just a lot of stuff that you wouldn't otherwise be doing if you weren't studying for an exam, you know. And so you end up improving your Spanish a lot. So I do plan to take the C1 exam in November. So that'll be after like 4 years total of learning Spanish.
Mhm.
And I'll probably start this summer preparing for that. I'll probably buy myself like a book where you can get like modelos del examen, like
Yeah.
exam practice exams.
Mhm.
And I'll especially practice the writing.
And do you think like after you do the C1 exam, like what's your next, like you were saying that you have like the 5 year kind of like, okay, I'll do 5 years and then
Yeah.
let's see what happens. Um but yeah, let's put ourselves like in the picture that you get to that point, you do really well and your Spanish is like really good. Like what do you do at that point?
It's a good question. I don't know because I told myself the same thing about the B2 exam. I told myself like, oh, after I pass the B2 exam, I'm gonna chill out on my Spanish. Like
Mhm.
I'm gonna get more into my other hobbies and like I don't know, like take less, like maybe take one class a week instead of three, and read more in English. You know, like kind of put it on the back burner sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I passed the B2 exam and I didn't do that. Uh, Partially because I have that like that growth mindset that I want to keep improving it, but also partially because I'm still enjoying it. It's not I haven't stopped enjoying it, so why
Mhm.
why change those habits? Um, but I don't know. I'm kind of saying the same thing about the C1. Like, oh, if I pass the C1 or I've been studying Spanish for 5 years, I'll put it on the back burner and I'll do something else. But who knows? You know?
Yeah, it's really hard to do so because I feel like, especially like different personalities, people who are like really into, I don't know, just keep pushing themselves into like some new goal. It's really
Yeah.
hard to like stop at that new goal because then you're like, oh, okay, I got to this point now. Like you want to get even better, or like you want to do, I don't know, get to the point where you can speak super fluently, or like get to the point where I don't know, like you're super native, or like stuff like that. So it's really hard to like put that goalpost and like stop at that point.
It's true. It's true. Um, yeah, but there have definitely been things I've like given up, I guess, studying
Mhm.
Spanish, you know what I mean? Just because you have to, because it's such a big time commitment. So I'm always telling myself that I'm gonna like pick those things back up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you have to put back like a lot of hobbies that you want to do. You just opt for Spanish or opt for something else, you know?
Yeah, but that's part of the reason why one of my goals is just sort of incorporate it into your daily life, like,
Hmm. So it's just
making,
naturally there.
yeah, exactly. Like, no matter what, I'm gonna wanna, for example, like do yoga. So like if I can do yoga in Spanish, why not?
Mm.
You know?
And so, okay, so and you have like your Spanish and your actual C1 exam set up. And I think you had mentioned before about learning Portuguese, I think you said. You mentioned just like touching on Portuguese, maybe another language or so. Do you feel like you'll put, I don't know, do you feel like you'll go into the same depth as you went with Spanish with other languages, or do you feel like you would even learn other languages?
I have thought about that before, and I definitely think I would not go into the same depth
Yeah.
because it's like probably the hardest thing I've ever tried to learn,
Hmm.
or like the most I've ever committed myself to learning one thing. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
Not that I couldn't just do that again, but it's like,
It's a big
I don't know.
commitment.
It's a huge commitment. Learning a
Yeah.
language, especially to fluency, is like, it's kind of crazy,
Yeah. And
you
getting to
know?
the point where you're really, really good, it's like even crazier, right? People would just think
Yeah.
like, wow, you spent all this time, now what?
Yeah.
Like,
I know. I mean,
yeah.
even when I like look at my flashcards, because I use flashcards every day with that app,
Hmm.
Anki, and at this point, I have something like 11,000 cards in there. And when I look at that and you can see how much time you've spent on it, I'm like, wow, that's like a big chunk of my life. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like
I could have done something more with that, or I don't know.
sometimes
Uh-huh.
yeah, sometimes I think that way. So I think I wouldn't go into the same depth. I think I would set a goal of like more surface level, like maybe A2, like get to the point where I can communicate basic things. I could travel in that country, or in the case of ASL, I could, I don't know, like help someone in ASL who needed help, but like I don't think I'd have that same fluency goal. But
Yeah,
who
yeah.
knows? That could also change, once you kind of
Once you
start
get
learning,
there,
you
then
could
you're
get that,
like,
yeah, you could get
yeah.
that same sort of passion and
It's like a
but
never-ending thing. Like you can always like push yourself to, and then that's like the worst part is like if you have more languages, you're like, oh, okay, maybe I can just like stop here, and then work back on my Spanish again, and I don't know, go back and forth. It's like you could do this forever, pretty much.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Um, and a couple more questions before we wrap up the interview. What are your plans for the channel? Like, I know you have like a bunch of stuff on Spanish. You said you'd like to post some stuff on your travels.
Yep.
I don't know, tell us a little bit about what else do you want to do with the channel?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my channel has always been a way to sort of document my life in a
Mhm.
way. Right now, a big part of my life is learning Spanish, so that's been a big part of my channel. But I have posted just pure music stuff on there before.
Mhm.
You know, some of my gigs, I've like posted clips from my gigs. I've posted like songs that I've written and recordings of playing the piano and stuff, singing and stuff like that. So I want to keep doing that because my goal has never been to like make money with my channel or like, I don't know, get a lot of followers or anything like that. Again, it's just to sort of document my progress with different things. And then hopefully, because I do also like helping people and teaching. So hopefully also it can be for at least some people, probably a niche, you know, group of people, sort of inspirational, you know, yeah, source of inspiration, giving them tips as well. Um, and I'd also like to find some sort of intersections between the different things that interest me. Like for example,
Mhm.
I have an interview lined up coming up on my channel with this YouTuber that I really like, who's a music teacher, and she lives in Mexico City, and she just makes videos like very specifically for other music teachers. So her channel
Yeah.
again is like super niche,
Mhm.
but I want to do an interview with her where we talk about learning music, but we also sort of talk about languages and like the similarities between learning music, learning languages, because there's a lot of intersections, you know.
Mhm. Cool, cool. And I think another question, one last question is, if you were to have given yourself advice, like when you first started, and this can go for people who are just starting out, what advice would you have given yourself? Or like maybe just one thing, I guess you could say.
Let me think about that one. That's a good question. It's kind of like thinking about if there's anything I sort of regret about, you know.
Or like even like now that you're just better at Spanish, like what would you have told yourself before? Like I don't know that like at least for me, like I don't know, telling myself that not really worrying too much about the process,
Hmm.
um, or like I don't know something like that. So
Yeah, I probably would have said the same, and I probably would have said like, I mean, this is something I'm still struggling with to like use it in real life. There's always a sort of feeling of, I don't know if embarrassment is the right word, but kind of just like, I don't know, you're a little like tentative to use it in real life, and I still feel that way sometimes. And it comes from a real place. Like occasionally I'll use my Spanish and I will be misunderstood, or I won't understand somebody and we'll have to switch to English. And but even in those extreme cases, there's really nothing wrong with that. You know,
mm,
trying to say something and being misunderstood and having to switch to English. It's not like that's a bad thing or anything, but especially in the beginning, I was very reluctant to use my Spanish in daily life. Um, and the more you can use it, the better. Like even at the
mm,
basic level, you know, if all you're doing is ordering a burrito in a Mexican restaurant, like that's gonna still help you.
cool,
So
cool.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks so much, Leo, for joining me on the channel. If you guys want to see a bunch of stuff from Leo, I'll put his link in the description box below. But yeah, thanks so much for being on the channel, Leo.
thank
We'll see
you,
you
Joe.
soon.
Yep, see you in the next collab.
See you.
Peace.